I was recently looking at the photos from a high-stakes diplomatic meeting, and one particular image stayed with me. It wasn't a handshake or a formal treaty, it was a gift. Japan's Prime Minister, Sone Takaichi, was presenting a gold leaf golf ball and a putter once owned by the late Shinzo Abe. There was something incredibly calculated, almost theatrical, about the gesture. A perfect performance of strong Japan diplomacy designed to charm a transactional Washington while simultaneously signaling to Beijing that the era of soft leadership was over. At that moment, she looked like the ultimate political survivor, a leader who could trigger trade bans on seafood and rare earths with a single comment about Taiwan and somehow watch her approval ratings go up because of it. Fast forward to the scenes at the LDP headquarters this past Sunday. The air was thick with triumph. The monitors displayed a staggering number, 352 seats. That's not just a win, it's a supermajority. The kind of power that allows a leader to override vetoes and effectively reshape the nation's future at will. To her supporters, Takaichi is the rising tide, a force of personality who has successfully weathered every political storm by doubling down on unapologetic nationalism. But as the celebrations continued, if you looked closely at the analysts and political scientists watching from the sidelines, the mood was different. They weren't focused on the map of Japan turning LDP red. They were looking at the voters who were noticeably absent. By leaning so heavily into a traditional patriarchal value system, flatly rejecting modern shifts like same-sex marriage or separate surnames, Takaichi has secured a massive victory today, but she may have traded away the party's future to get it. It creates this jarring contradiction. The LDP has never been more powerful in the halls of government, yet it has never felt more disconnected from the diversifying values of the people it's supposed to lead. It makes you wonder, is this the start of a new ironclad era for Japan, or is Takaichi simply presiding over a very successful, very loud closing act?
That really is the question of the hour, isn't it? Whether this is a new dawn or a very bright sunset, it depends completely on your perspective, on where you sit in Japanese society. It's a really complex morning to be digging into all this.
And just to set the stage for everyone listening, today is February 9th, 2026. We're, less than 24 hours out from an election result that is, I think you'd have to say, the most important in Japan for decades.
Well, you'd have to go back to Shinzo Abe's return in 2012 to find something this significant. And I would argue this is actually more so.
Why?
Because the entire global context is different. I mean, we're not in the 2010s anymore, right? The stakes around global trade, around security, especially in East Asia, and, the demographic pressures inside Japan, they're all exponentially higher. The ground has completely shifted.
Right. And that's exactly what we're going to try and do today. The mission for this deep dive is to get past the headlines, the confetti and the victory speeches about the supermajority. We want to unpack the actual machinery of what's coming next, the reality of what they're calling resilient Japan.
Resilient Japan. It's a great piece of branding. You see it everywhere. But we need to, pop the hood on that and see what the engine actually looks like. Mm-hmm. Is this just a new coat of paint? Or is it a complete structural overhaul of the country?
And we've got a huge pile of material to work through today. We've got speeches from Davos, we've got internal policy documents from the Ministry of Finance, reports on military tech, and of course a deep dive into the election data itself. We're going to try and structure this around 3 specific pillars to make sense of it all.
Yeah. First, we'll look at the physical transformation, the actual, concrete and steel. Mm-hmm. The industrial base.
Then the political consolidation of power, how Takaichi built this machine, and what the social costs of that stability might be.
And finally, the security piece. The militarization of technology and foreign policy, what some are calling the technological shield.
And I think it's important to state the stakes right up top. This isn't just about what's happening in Tokyo. This feels like a major pivot, a shift away from that cautious pacifism that has defined Japan for 70 years to something, something very different.
The phrase they're using in the policy papers is controlled assertiveness. And in a world this volatile, that shift changes the entire chessboard. For the U.S., for China, for the entire global supply chain, Japan is still the world's 4th largest economy. When it decides to move, everyone feels the vibrations.
Okay, let's dive in. I want to start with that first pillar, the physical transformation, because, elections can feel so abstract, just numbers on a screen. But the results of this one are going to be very, very tangible.
Right. Policy eventually becomes concrete. You can track a nation's ideology just by counting the cranes in the sky.
I heard a story recently from a logistics manager named Sato who works at the port of Kitakyushu. He describes the 1990s as a long winter where the cranes seemed to move slower every year and the rust on the shipping containers felt like a metaphor for the country's spirit. But following the 2023 elections, Sato noticed a change in the pace of the dockyards. Under Prime Minister Takaichi's mandate for national strength, the government didn't just talk about reform, they began pouring concrete. Sato watched as massive, automated deep-water berths were constructed alongside a new high-speed rail spur designed to bypass old bottlenecks. He told his colleagues that for the first time in decades, the port felt like a fortress of commerce rather than a relic. To Sato, this state capacity isn't an abstract political term. It's the physical weight of a Shinkansen train humming past his office, a literal backbone for a country preparing for a turbulent global market. Reading Sato's account, I can't help but feel the visceral relief that comes with tangible progress. As a commentator, I often see people criticize these massive strategic investments as being too cold or too focused on hard power. However, from Sato's perspective, these aren't just blocks of cement, they are the armor Japan is putting on. While the Middle Reform Alliance struggled with their internal identity and religious ties, the LDP leaned into the idea of a hard-shell Japan. It's a stark, conservative vision, and while some might find the heavy infrastructure a bit old school, there's an undeniable comfort in seeing a nation build its way out of uncertainty.
That phrase, hard shell Japan, is just so powerful, and it lines up perfectly with everything we're seeing in the macroeconomic data and, the rhetoric coming from the Takaichi administration. It isn't just one guy, Sato, feeling this at one port. This is a coordinated national strategy.
It feels like a throwback in a way. It reminds me of the post-war Japanese economic miracle, building things to project strength, but is this time different?
I think it's fundamentally different. Back in the so-called lost decades, the 90s, the early 2000s, a lot of that construction was criticized as just pork barrel politics. You remember the story?
Bridges to nowhere.
Exactly. Building a bridge in a rural prefecture just to keep construction companies afloat and, secure LDP votes. It was inefficient. It was Keynesianism at its worst, digging holes just to fill them back in.
Right. It was artificial stimulus, not strategic investment.
What Sato is describing at that port, and what the policy documents are backing up, is a different concept. It's about building state capacity. And this connects directly to a key speech that Finance Minister Katayama Satsuki gave at Davos just last month.
Okay, yeah, I've got that speech right here. She uses this phrase, responsible and proactive public finances, which, let's be honest, usually sounds like a politician's way of saying we're about to spend a ton of money.
It does, but you have to look at the context she's putting it in. She frames it as a conscious shift away from a deflationary, cost-cutting economy. Japan has been trapped in that mindset for 30 years.
Right. Cutting costs, shrinking budgets, wages, totally flat. The whole country was in a defensive crouch.
And corporations were just hoarding cash. They weren't investing. She's explicitly saying that for Japan to be strong again, the state has to step in first and build the supply capacity. The government has to lead.
So it's sort of a big government approach, but in the service of capitalism.
The state is acting as the lead investor, the ultimate venture capitalist and infrastructure developer. It's a total rejection of the austerity model. And the numbers she's throwing around are pretty stunning. Nominal GDP is now over $4 trillion US dollars.
Which is a huge psychological barrier to cross.
Wages are up over 5% for 2 years in a row. For a country that had zero wage growth for a generation, that is a revolution.
And then there's the Nikkei average reaching 5 times its 2012 level. That's just a staggering creation of wealth, at least on paper.
But for a person like Sato in Kirikyushu, it's not about the stock market ticker. It's about what economists call the virtuous cycle. The government invests in the port, that investment attracts more shipping business, the business needs more workers, so wages go up, and then those workers have more money to spend. It's Econ 101, but Japan hasn't really tried it with this level of aggression in a long, long time.
So they're moving from a philosophy of distributing a shrinking pie to baking a much bigger pie through heavy investment?
Exactly. And it's not just old school infrastructure like ports and rails. The hard shell is also very high-tech. This is not your grandfather's industrial policy.
Right. The sources talk about some very futuristic armor as well. This isn't just about moving boxes.
This is where we get into the Rapidus project. Have you had a chance to dig into the details on that?
This is their big push on domestic chip manufacturing, right?
Push is an understatement. This is a full-blown, state-backed moonshot to mass-produce cutting-edge 2-nanometer chips inside Japan.
Okay. I hear 2 nanometer and I nod along like I know what it means, but can you break that down for us? Why is that number, 2 nanometers, the hill they've chosen to fight on.
So in the world of semiconductors, the smaller the number, the better. The number refers to the size of the transistors on the chip. A 2-nanometer process is the absolute bleeding edge of what's possible. It lets you pack billions more transistors onto a single sliver of silicon.
Which means more processing power and less energy use.
Exponentially more power, significantly less energy. This is the engine you need for real AI. Not just chatbots, but for autonomous driving, for advanced weapons systems, for the data centers that run the modern world.
And right now, the most advanced chips all come from one place.
Almost exclusively from TSMC in Taiwan, and that is a massive strategic vulnerability that keeps policymakers in Tokyo and in Washington up at night.
Right. If there's any disruption to that supply chain, a natural disaster, a blockade, anything, the entire Japanese economy could grind to a halt.
Your auto industry is dead. Your robotics industry is dead. You can't build a modern car or a modern factory or a modern missile without these chips. So when we talk about state capacity, this is what it means in the 21st century. It means ensuring you can make the brains for your entire economy inside your own borders. It's defensive manufacturing.
So it's not even primarily about making money selling chips to the world. It's about making sure you don't starve if the tech supply chain breaks.
It's about economic security. And they're pairing that with another concept they're calling physical AI.
Physical AI. Is that like a robot you can have a conversation with?
I mean, maybe eventually. But we've all spent the last few years obsessed with generative AI things that create text or images, things that live on a screen. Physical AI is about moving that intelligence out of the digital world and into the physical one.
So, robots that can think and adapt.
Exactly. Autonomous robotic assistants on assembly lines, unmanned plant operations. We're talking about automating huge swaths of the industrial base, which you have to do if you have a shrinking population, which Japan does.
Right. The demographic problem is the ghost at the feast for all of this.
But you can't just plug the gap with the dumb robots we've had for decades, the ones that just weld the same spot on a car door over and over. You need smart robots that can handle different parts, that can inspect for quality, that can work safely alongside human workers.
And the government is putting serious money behind this.
The goal is over $330 billion in combined public and private investment in AI and semiconductors.
330 billion, that is a truly massive number.
And 66 billion of that is direct public support from the government. That's the state saying to the private sector, we are going to de-risk this for you. We will build the expensive shell. You just come in and fill it. It is a level of direct industrial policy we haven't seen since the glory days of MIT in the 1980s.
But here's the political question, and I think this is where the election result really becomes clear. Building a new port or a robot factory, that takes years. People have to buy groceries today. Inflation has been a problem in Japan, just like everywhere else. How does the hard shell help the person buying eggs at the supermarket?
That is the crucial political balancing act. Right. You can't build a fortress for the future if the people inside are anxious and struggling in the present. And Takaichi is a very shrewd politician. She knows this. She couldn't just run on a 10-year plan for future Japan. She had to have an answer for right now Japan.
And I saw that list of immediate relief measures. Some of these are surprisingly targeted and, well, populist, like abolishing the temporary gasoline tax.
That so-called temporary tax has been in place since 1974.
Wait, since the first oil crisis? Yeah. Temporary for 50 years.
Welcome to the world of government taxation. Scrapping it after all that time is a huge symbolic move. It's a signal that says, we are breaking with the old, stagnant, bureaucratic way of doing things. They also cut diesel tax surcharges, which directly helps logistics companies and truckers, lowering the cost of moving everything in the country.
And then there's the change to the income tax exemption threshold. This one seemed to get a lot of media attention. They called it the 1.03 million yen wall.
Yes, this is a really big deal for the labor market, especially for women.
Okay, why was it a wall?
So for decades, there was this rule. If you were a part-time worker, and in Japan, this is very often a student or a spouse, usually a woman, working to supplement family income. If you earn more than 1.03 million yen a year, so about $10,000, you suddenly got hit with income tax. But more importantly, you often lost your dependent status on your spouse's health insurance.
So if you earned 1.04 million, you could actually end up with less take-home pay than if you had earned 1.02 million.
Exactly. You have a massive disincentive to work more. So what would happen? People would track their hours, and when they got close to the cap in, say, November, They just stop working for the rest of the year. It created an artificial ceiling on the labor supply.
So by raising that threshold, you unleash all that pent-up labor.
You put more money in people's pockets immediately, and you get more people working more hours without being afraid of a tax penalty. It's a win-win.
And on top of that, they're rolling out free school lunches and making high school education free starting this April.
Which is a huge relief for young families. It directly lowers the cost of raising children in a country with a cratering birth rate. It's another policy that addresses both an immediate need and a long-term strategic problem.
Okay, so on one hand, you have massive long-term government spending on high-tech industry. On the other hand, you have immediate tax cuts and social spending.
It is extremely expensive. It is a very deliberate policy of interventionist economics, but it's blended with a conservative nationalist ideology. And the predictable result has been a weakening of the yen.
Which is great for the big exporters.
Companies like Toyota and Sone absolutely love it. Their products become cheaper for foreigners to buy, and the profits they make in dollars or euros are worth more when they bring them home.
But it's bad for consumers because it makes everything that Japan has to import, which is most of its energy and food, more expensive.
That's the trade-off. There's a very real debate among economists about whether this is sustainable in the long run. Are they just printing money to build their fortress and paper over the cracks?
But clearly, looking at the election result, 352 seats, the voters bought into the vision.
They did. Because unlike the austerity policies of the past, the old "let's all tighten our belts for the good of the nation" rhetoric, this feels like action. It feels like forward movement. And when the world feels chaotic and uncertain, action is a very, very attractive political commodity.
Which brings us perfectly to the next pillar, because you can have all the best blueprints in the world for a shiny new robot factory, but if your government is a revolving door, if you have a new prime minister every 18 months, you can't actually build anything. And Japan, for a long time, was the king of revolving door governments.
It absolutely was. We used to joke that Japanese prime ministers had the shelf life of a carton of milk. That has fundamentally changed.
So let's talk about the political machine that makes all this long-term planning possible. I saw a series of posts from a retired civil servant in Tokyo named Kenji. He spends his mornings at a local cafe watching international news clips on his tablet. He recently shared his thoughts on the chaos of the West, the constant swinging of the political pendulum in Washington and London that leaves long-term projects in the trash every 4 years. He compared it to the boring stability of Japan's LDP Supermajority. Kenji remembers when the opposition tried to form a coalition with the Soka Gakkai-linked reformers, but he watched it crumble because it lacked a singular, stable direction. For Kenji, the Takaichi victory represents a national insurance policy. He described a sense of calm walking through a city where the 5-year and 10-year plans don't change just because the wind blows. In his eyes, the LDP's dominance isn't an erosion of choice, but a commitment to collective survival in a world that has become dangerously unpredictable. Watching Kenji's reflections, I'm struck by how different the Asian model of governance looks when you're actually living inside it. From a Western liberal standpoint, a supermajority can feel suffocating or even stagnant. But as I read between the lines of Kenji's posts, I see a man who values the predictability of peace. It's a very conservative, perhaps even traditionalist view, prioritizing the survival of the collective over the noise of the individual. I try to understand the anxiety that drives this. When the world feels like it's falling apart, a strong, steady hand starts to look less like an ideology and more like a necessity. It's a trade-off that many in the West might find difficult, but for Kenji, it's the only way to ensure the lights stay on for his grandchildren.
Boring stability. That is such a powerful phrase, and it's a complete counter-narrative to how we usually think about healthy democracy in the West, isn't it? We prize competition, vigorous debate, change, the marketplace of ideas. And this person, Kenji, is saying, no, what I prize is knowing that the plan we make today will still be the plan in 2030.
And 352 seats suggests that a huge portion of the country agrees with him. But let's look at the flip side of that stability, which is the absolute demolition of the opposition. The Centrist Reform Alliance, that was the main opposition bloc, the Constitutional Democratic Party, plus Komeito, they went from 172 seats down to just 49.
That is an extinction-level event for a political party. It's a wipeout.
And why did they collapse so completely?
I think we have to zoom in on the Komeito factor. Kenji mentioned the Soka Gakkai-linked reformers in his post, and this is a crucial detail that often gets missed in international coverage.
Right on, Soka Gakkai is a large Buddhist organization.
It's a massive lay Buddhist organization with millions of highly dedicated, highly organized members. And Komeito, for all intents and purposes, has historically been its political arm. they can deliver a huge block of votes.
And for a long time, Komeito was in coalition with the LDP, right? They were seen as the moderate, pacifist conscience of the government.
Exactly. They were the kingmakers. They kept the LDP from drifting too far to the right, especially on military and security issues. But in this election cycle, the main opposition party tried to peel them away from the LDP and bring them into a new reform alliance.
And it backfired.
It backfired spectacularly. The analysis we're seeing suggests that a lot of swing voters were deeply unnerved by this. They saw the blurred lines between religion and governance in that opposition bloc and got scared. They looked at the centrist Reform Alliance and saw a group that might be beholden to religious interests rather than purely national ones.
Whereas Takaichi and the LDP, despite being much more conservative on paper, were seen as the secular, nationalist strong pole.
Exactly. Takaichi is an ultra-conservative, but she is a secular nationalist. Her religion is Japan. Her gospel is national strength. And in a time of deep anxiety, voters chose the predictable national insurance policy over the experimental and, in their view, potentially compromised new coalition.
But this is where the story gets so complicated and where that jarring contradiction we mentioned at the top comes in. Sone Takaichi is the first female prime minister of Japan. That is a historic, glass ceiling shattering achievement.
A monumental moment in Japanese history.
And yet, her public persona and her policies are anything but feminist in the Western sense. She famously declared, "I am a politician before I am a woman."
She did, and every action she takes suggests she meant it literally.
I mean, her government has flatly rejected legalizing same-sex marriage. She's also opposed to allowing married couples to use separate surnames, which is a huge, huge issue for professional women in Japan who build a career under their own name and then are forced to change it on every legal document when they marry.
And this is the great paradox of her leadership. She is a woman who has reached the absolute pinnacle of power in a deeply patriarchal system, not by promising to dismantle that system, but by proving she could run it more effectively than any of the men.
So she climbed the ladder and then...
Maybe not pulled it up behind her, but she certainly isn't focused on building a new ramp for others. Her cabinet appointments reflect this. She talks about meritocracy over gender quotas. Yes, she appointed 6 female ministers, which is a record. But they're all there because they are ideological loyalists who align with her vision, not because of some diversity initiative.
So it seems like she made a very clear political bet. She bet that the majority of Japanese voters at this moment in history care far more about economic security and national strength, the hard shell, than they do about social liberalism.
That is precisely the bet she made. And Sunday's election result is the proof that she won that bet, hands down.
Yeah.
But remember, the analysts in the intro who were looking worried, they were looking at the people who weren't celebrating. The younger generation, urban professionals, the people who do want separate surnames, who are more open to LGBTQ rights, they are feeling completely shut out of this vision for Japan.
And the risk is that if you secure the present by alienating the future, eventually that bill comes due.
Eventually it does. But Takaichi's counter-argument would be that without a secure present, without a strong economy and a credible defense, there won't be a future left to argue about.
And speaking of the future and demographics, let's talk about immigration, because this ties right back into the economy. We just established that they're building all these massive new factories and ports. They need workers. Japan's population is shrinking and aging rapidly, but Takaichi's platform on immigration is, well, it is not exactly open borders.
It is the furthest thing from it. The official term for the policy is orderly coexistence.
Orderly coexistence. That sounds polite, but very strict.
It's polite code for, we will allow you to come here if you are useful, and as long as you follow our rules to the letter. Her coalition with the Nippon Ishin Nokai Party put a heavy emphasis on manageable levels of immigration. They're even proposing a new government agency specifically to combat illegal immigration and visa overstays.
And the language is all about cultural and institutional integration and mutual respect for Japanese norms.
Right. So you see the fundamental friction point here. The economic plan, Pillar 1, desperately needs more labor. But the political ideology, Pillar 2, is built on homogeneity, order, and preserving a traditional Japanese identity.
So Takaichi is trying to thread an incredibly difficult needle. It's like saying, come here and build our country, but please don't change anything about it while you're here.
That's the High Wire Act.
Yeah.
And to help manage the anxiety about national decline, she's also trying to turn more Japanese citizens into capitalists themselves.
Right, the NISA expansion.
Yes. NISA is Japan's tax-exempt investment account program, similar to a Roth IRA in the US or an ISA in the UK. They have massively expanded it. We're now up to 27 million accounts.
27 million, that's nearly 1 in 4 adults in the country.
And you have to understand, Japanese households are sitting on an estimated $15 trillion in assets. But historically, most of that has been parked in cash, in low-interest bank accounts, or literally under the mattress. The Japanese are famously risk-averse savers.
And Takaichi's government wants to get that money out from under the mattress and into the stock market.
To make every citizen a stakeholder in the success of Japan Inc.
That's the stability pitch, isn't it? If your retirement savings are tied to the performance of the Nikkei, and the LDP is the party that keeps the Nikkei going up, you're going to keep voting for the LDP. It ties an individual's financial survival directly to the party's political survival.
It's cynical, but it's brilliant political engineering. It aligns the voters' financial interest with the government's national strategy.
Okay, so we have a physical fortress being built with ports and ships. We have a political fortress secured by a supermajority and millions of new stock portfolios. But a fortress also needs walls, and it needs guards on those walls. And that brings us to our third and final pillar: security, technology, and foreign policy.
And this is where that phrase, controlled assertiveness, really comes into play. This is where the shift from cautious pacifism becomes most visible to the rest of the world.
Imagine a young researcher named Akiko at a robotics startup in Sendai. For years, her lab struggled to find funding for high-end sensor arrays because the commercial market was too volatile. Then came the Takaichi shift. Suddenly, the government's assertive defense posture began to bridge the gap between military necessity and civilian innovation. Akiko found her lab flush with grants because her sensors were classified as dual-use critical for both autonomous delivery drones and national defense systems. She wrote about the strange sensation of seeing her patents surge alongside Japan's defense budget. She felt a new sense of mission. Her work wasn't just a product anymore, it was part of the country's technological shield. To her, the results-oriented security policy meant that Japanese intellect was finally being weaponized, not for war, but for the stability of the entire East Asian economic sphere. I've been following the data on these patent filings, and Akiko's story puts a very human face on what could otherwise be seen as a hawkish military expansion. There is an intensity to Prime Minister Takaichi's rhetoric that can feel polarizing, especially when she speaks of physical strength and deterrence. It's a right-leaning, results-first approach that unapologetically links science to the state. When I read about Akiko's pride in her work, I recognize that for many young professionals in Japan, this isn't about aggression, it's about relevance. They want to know that their country still has the technological teeth to protect its prosperity. While we should always be cautious when the line between defense and industry blurs, it's clear that this synergy is providing a renewed sense of purpose for a generation that was tired of being on the sidelines.
Akiko's story is the perfect real-world example of a concept called innovation spillover. We often think of military spending as just money poured down a hole. You know, you buy a tank, it sits in a garage, maybe it gets used, maybe it doesn't, but it doesn't really contribute to the broader economy.
Right, the old guns versus butter debate. You can spend on one or the other, but not both.
But Takaichi's government is betting you can have both. The research shows that when a government invests heavily in dual-use technologies, things like advanced sensors, AI, new materials, robotics, that are technically for defense, it has a massive positive spillover effect into the civilian economy. I mean, the internet and GPS were both originally military projects.
So Akiko's sensor might help a missile find its target, but that same core technology could also help a self-driving car navigate a city street or a surgical robot perform a more precise operation.
And by committing to raise defense spending to 2% of GDP, which is a massive historic break with Japan's post-war pacifist tradition, the government is essentially creating a huge new pool of venture capital for the country's most advanced tech sectors. They're just funneling it through the Ministry of Defense.
The technological shield.
And it's a comprehensive vision. They're not just buying more planes. They're creating a new strategic intelligence agency. They're integrating cyber and space defense capabilities. It is a complete modernization of the entire security apparatus from the ground up.
But let's talk about the external side of this, because when Japan decides to build up its military and its tech shield, its neighbors notice, especially the very large neighbor right next door.
China. That is, without a doubt, the defining strategic relationship of the 21st century for Japan.
And Takaichi seems to have a very clear, if very bold, strategy for this relationship. They're calling it the 3Ds.
Deterrence, dialogue, and diversification.
Okay, deterrence is pretty clear. That's the 2% spending, the new sensors, the stronger military. But the dialogue part seems tricky, given the rhetoric.
It is extremely tricky. Because as you said in the intro, Takaichi publicly stated that a conflict over Taiwan would represent an existential crisis for Japan.
Which is just a statement of geographic and economic fact. A huge portion of Japan's trade and energy imports pass through those sea lanes, but to say it so bluntly, that's a new level of directness.
It is stating the quiet part out loud. And predictably, there was a swift reaction. We saw the trade bans on Japanese seafood imports, restrictions on rare earth exports to Japan.
But here's the most fascinating part of the story. After those trade bans were put in place, Takaichi's domestic approval ratings went up.
They did. Because she didn't back down. She didn't apologize. A previous generation of Japanese leaders might have immediately flown to Beijing to try and smooth things over, to prioritize immediate trade stability above all else. Takaichi stood her ground, and she used the trade bans as political fuel. She pointed to them and said, "See, this is why Japan needs to be stronger and more self-reliant."
She flipped the entire narrative. Instead of it being, my tough talk caused a problem, it became, my tough talk revealed a pre-existing problem that we now must fix.
Exactly. It's a classic rally round the flag effect. And at the same time, she's balancing that hard line with the very theatrical gift diplomacy we saw with the United States, that gold leaf golf ball for President Trump.
It was pure political theater, but it was brilliant. Giving Donald Trump a gold-plated golf ball and a putter that once belonged to Shinzo Abe, that's a masterclass in symbolic communication.
It says, I understand and respect the personal relationship, because Trump famously valued his friendship with Abe. But the gold says, we are wealthy, we are a valuable partner, we are a premium ally. It's designed to charm a transactional Washington, which Japan absolutely needs on its side to counterbalance its position in Asia.
So she's playing hardball in her own neighborhood and playing golf with her most powerful ally.
While at the same time, she's aggressively pursuing the third D, diversification. Japan is finally realizing it cannot afford to be caught in a simple binary choice between the U.S. and China. It needs other friends and other options.
And this is where the Central Asia plus Japan initiative comes in, right?
Yes, reviving the C5 plus Japan framework. That's a diplomatic and economic partnership with Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan.
It seems like a strange focus area. Why Central Asia? Isn't that traditionally seen as Russia's sphere of influence?
It has been, yes. But Japan sees a strategic opening. They want to position themselves as the bridge between the technological West and the resource-rich East. They want to help build new energy corridors and logistics routes, pipelines, railways, ports that bypass both Russian and Chinese-dominated territory.
So if the supply of rare earth minerals is restricted from one source, Japan can secure them from Kazakhstan instead.
It's about building strategic autonomy. And they're going to these countries and offering to build high-quality, reliable infrastructure as an alternative to other development initiatives in the region. It's a very attractive pitch. We will build you good roads, efficient power plants, and high-tech grids that will last for 50 years.
And speaking of power plants, we have to talk about the final and maybe most controversial piece of this security puzzle, the return to nuclear power.
It is definitely the most controversial domestic move. But from a strategic point of view, it's completely logical within this hard-shell framework. Takaichi is pushing for a rapid and widespread revival of Japan's nuclear power industry. The plan is to restart at least 17 reactors by 2030 and to begin construction on a new generation of advanced reactors.
After the Fukushima disaster in 2011, I thought nuclear power was politically dead in Japan forever. I thought the public would never, ever accept it again.
And for a decade, it was. It was politically toxic. But the latest polls show a stunning reversal. Over 54% of the public now supports restarting the reactors. It's the first time there's been majority support since the disaster.
What changed? Is it just that memories are fading?
But the bigger drivers are economic and strategic. People are tired of paying sky-high electricity bills, which are a direct result of having to import massive amounts of oil, gas, and coal. And Takaichi's government has been brilliant at reframing the issue. They don't just talk about nuclear power as green or cheap. They frame it as a matter of national security.
Right. If you have your own nuclear plants, you are no longer dependent on hydrocarbon imports from volatile regions of the world. You achieve energy independence.
And that is the ultimate form of resilience, isn't it? Resilient Japan means making your own chips, protecting your own sea lanes, and generating your own power.
Even if that power comes with its own set of very serious risks.
It's a risk calculation. And right now, the Japanese public seems willing to trade the potential risk of another nuclear accident for the certainty of keeping the lights on and the factories running.
So if we pull the camera back and look at the whole picture, We've unpacked the three pillars: the physical transformation building, the hard shell with ports, rails, and AI, the political machine, the stability of the supermajority and the social trade-offs it demands, and the security shield weaponizing technology and diversifying Japan's place in the world.
And what's remarkable is how tightly integrated they are. You can't separate them. The massive economic investment requires political stability. That political stability is protected by a stronger security posture. And that stronger security posture is, in turn, funded by and used to fuel the high-tech economy. It's a closed loop.
When you lay it all out like that, it really does feel like a coherent Takaichi doctrine.
I think you could call it a new form of strategic conservatism. It takes the legacy of Shinzo Abe, the strong foreign policy, the nationalism, and it fuses it with a very pragmatic, almost state capitalist economic interventionism.
It's an attempt to reconcile being part of a globalized world with protecting your own national sovereignty. It's about participating in the world, but on Japan's terms.
Exactly. And the trade-offs are laid bare for everyone to see. In exchange for a booming, fortified economy and a stable government that can actually execute a 10-year plan, you purchase it at the cost of social liberalism. You purchase it with increased diplomatic friction with your neighbors. You purchase it by doubling down on traditional values that may well alienate the next generation.
Japan, under this new mandate, has decisively chosen hard shell resilience over soft power ambiguity.
That is the defining choice of this election. And the voters have ratified it with one of the biggest majorities in modern history.
It's a truly fascinating moment to be watching this country, and I think the ripples from what happened on Sunday are going to be felt for a very, very long time.
Absolutely. The architecture that's being built in Japan right now will define its place in the world for the rest of the mid-21st century.
The Takaichi era is defined by the belief that for a nation to survive a chaotic century, it must become a fortress economically, militarily, and culturally. It's a compelling vision that has won a supermajority. But as the walls go up and the dual-use sensors hum to life, one has to consider the nature of fortresses. They are excellent at keeping dangers out, but they are just as effective at locking the future in. Whether that future looks like a sanctuary or a silo remains to be seen.